the presentations. Okay, welcome to the webinar on sufficiency of measures analysis to support the HELCOM Baltic Sea Action Plan update. My name is Heini Ahtiainen. I work as a project coordinator at the HELCOM Secretariat, and I will be giving the first presentation, an overview of the sufficiency of measures analysis. And Liisa Saikkonen will continue.
Hi.
She's here as well. She's working for the Action Project. And she will continue by presenting the use of expert survey responses in the SOM analysis. And we are recording this webinar, so you can also watch it afterwards. So the idea how this webinar runs is that we will first give these two presentations, and after that you will have the opportunity to ask questions, so there's an opportunity for discussion. But for the time of the presentations, I kindly ask you to keep your microphones muted so that everyone can hear. And if there are any problems with the sound, serious problems, you can write it in the chat. And also remember that the recording will be available later. So the sound quality in the recording should be fine. So you can also, if there are serious problems with the sound, perhaps it's easier to watch the recording. Okay, well, let me start. As I said, my name is Heini Ahtiainen. I work at the HELCOM Secretariat, and I'll present the overview of the sufficiency of measures analysis. So just to give you all general understanding of the sufficiency of measures analysis, what we are doing here. And then Liisa Saikkonen will continue in a more detailed manner on the use of the survey responses in the analysis. And this webinar is organized to support the data validation by HELCOM working groups, so to give you background information for that. Okay, so the objective of the analysis is to assess whether the existing measures are sufficient in achieving good environmental status in the Baltic Sea. So we have quite a lot of measures, different kinds of measures and actions in place, regional, national, and we want to know whether we can actually achieve good environmental status with those measures. This analysis is one of the activities in the HELCOM Baltic Sea Action Plan update. We are carrying it out in the HELCOM platform for sufficiency of measures and in the HELCOM Action Project. And the work takes place 2019-2020, so it will be finalized during this year. And this overall approach for the analysis has gone through the important HELCOM groups. The heads of delegations have endorsed this approach, and the sufficiency of measures platform has discussed and commented and supported the work in its two meetings last year. So what are the features of the analysis? So first, the aim is to support the HELCOM Baltic Sea Action Plan update by assessing how far we are from achieving good environmental status with existing measures. And that information can be used to also identify the need for potential new measures. So if indeed we find that we are not able to achieve good status with existing measures, then we will need to strengthen existing measures or identify some potential new measures to bridge that gap. This is the first time a similar exercise has been done in the Baltic Sea region or anywhere else. And by nature, it combines natural and social scientific approaches. And it's worth noting that we are covering a lot of topics in this analysis. So basically all the state components from that are under HELCOM and are included in the, for example, in the second holistic assessment of ecosystem health, HOLAS 2. So we have biodiversity topics, but we also have pressure-based topics, and we are applying the same approach, the same general approach across all of these topics, so that we can have a comparable and coherent analysis. But we are also taking into account possible topic-specific adjustments that are needed, but we aim for a coherent analysis across topics. And whenever I refer to topics, I mean these, which are listed on this slide in the parentheses. So for example, birds, mammals, fish, benthic habitats, marine litter, input of nutrients from agriculture. In the sufficiency of measures analysis, we need to assess the so-called business as usual state of the environment. This figure illustrates that. In the x-axis, you can see time, and in the y-axis, you can see environmental status. So the aim is to assess the status of the environment in some future year. That's the end year of the business as usual scenario, taking into account the development in environmental status from current year to that future year. And in this analysis, we assume that there are two things that affect environmental status. First of all, we have measures which improve the state of the environment. And then the second thing is the change in human activities. So human activities in the Baltic Sea may increase or decrease, and that can in turn affect pressures to the environment and further environmental state. So this change in human activities can either improve environmental status or lead to an improvement in environmental status or to a deterioration. So we take these two things into account over time and their effect on environmental status over time. And then we can assess what's the business as usual state at the end year. In this case, the exact end year is not known. It has been decided to be in the range of 2030 to 2035. That's been decided by heads of delegations at HELCOM. But it's in that range. So we assess the environmental status at that future year, and we can compare it to good environmental status whenever the threshold for good environmental status exists. And thus we can identify the gap between the business as usual state and the good environmental state. And if indeed there is a gap, we know, or we can deduce that existing measures are not sufficient in achieving good environmental status, and we need new measures or to strengthen existing measures. I will go to the components of the SOM analysis now. This figure shows them in a very general manner, and I will describe them in more detail in the next slides. But to assess this business as usual state in the future year, we need to know how measures affect pressures and further environmental state, and we also need to know how these changes in activities or projected development of activities affect pressures and further environmental state. So we need to develop this kind of a linkage framework which links measures to activities, pressures and environmental state. most of the work in the analysis is actually in the links, not in the boxes. So to know how different components affect each other and how changes in different components affect each other, that's the main thing in the analysis. But let me describe the main components now in a little bit more detail. So first of all, we've identified existing measures to improve the state of the environment. So these are measures in existing and relevant policies, for example, the current Helcom Baltic Sea Action Plan and the EU Marine Strategy Framework Directive. So they can be both regional measures or national measures or EU-wide measures. And by existing measures, we mean measures that have been implemented, are being implemented, or are planned to be implemented in the time frame of the business as usual scenario. So they are measures that have an effect on pressures or environmental state in the time frame of the business as usual scenario from now until this future year, 2030 something. And we are not working at the level of individual measures, because that would be infeasible for the analysis. Remember that we are doing the same analysis for all of the topics. So these individual measures have been grouped to measure types to reduce their number and actually make the analysis feasible. These measure types are a combination of individual measures and they are on a more general level than individual measures. So, an important part of the analysis is to assess how measures affect pressures or environmental state. So, in this part, we assess the reductions in specific pressures from specific activities from implementing a generalized measure. So, how the measure reduces one single pressure from single activity. And this is done for all pressures and all activities. We assess this as a percent change. So if we implement the measure, how many percent does the pressure change? And we are also able to take into account restoration measures. For them, we assess how the measures affect the environmental state directly. So there the effect does not go through pressures. This part of the analysis is based on expert elicitation. So we have now a lot of sufficiency of measures expert surveys going on, and some of them are related to the effectiveness of measures. In addition to expert elicitation, we will complement the expert-based data using existing literature and models. So we are in the process of conducting a literature review, finding relevant literature on the effectiveness of measures that we can use to complement the expert-based assessment. Okay, next component is the link between activities and pressures. So that means how the different activities contribute to pressures. So their relative contribution. This link or this information is also mainly based on expert surveys. For most of the topics, that's the case. For loss and disturbance to the seabed, so benthic habitats, we've used the same approach as in Helcom second holistic assessment of ecosystem health, HOLAS 2, where the percent contribution of activities is linked to these two physical disturbance pressures. And for input of nutrients from agriculture, or in general, we have data from the action project work package 4. So the next important component, linking pressures with state components. So here we assess how the changes in pressures affect environmental state. And here we have two somewhat different approaches which depend on whether there is an existing threshold for good environmental status. So by that I mean that HELCOM has agreed on a GES threshold. So if a threshold for good environmental status exists, we assess the pressure reduction that's required to reach or maintain good environmental status. For those state components for which there is no agreed GS threshold, we can assess the change in the state component from specific reductions in pressures. And both of these are assessed in percentages. This component is mainly based on expert elicitation. And then, in addition to measures, we need to take into account the possible development of human activities in the time frame of the business as usual scenario. So these may change over time, and we should account for that. Different assumptions are possible. We can, and the simplest is to assume that there's no change in the activities taking place in the Baltic Sea. But then there's also information, quite a lot of information from regional and national data sources to assess how these human activities may develop over time. And we can take that into account and assess the most likely change in activities in the time frame of the business as usual scenario. We can also assume, we can make additional assumptions. For example, assess a low scenario, so a small change in activities, moderate one based on this most likely change, and then a high scenario based on the largest projected change. Different assumptions are possible. This analysis is limited to predominant activities, so we've selected the main activities in the Baltic Sea to take into account here. And as I said, we have identified several data sources for this. So this is based on existing literature and models providing estimates on the projected development of activities. Expert work will come into play when we need to translate some of the qualitative information into percentages. So the aim is to assess this projected development or change also in percentages in the activities. And some of the data sources only provide qualitative information. Some of them provide also quantitative and percent information. So, but we need to make those comparable and coherent and transform all of the information into percentages. Okay, so this slide just shows the main components in the analysis where we're using expert elicitation. We are using that to link the activities to pressures, so to assess the relative contributions of activities to pressures. Then to assess the effects of measures on pressures, the expert elicitation is complemented there on information from literature and models. And then we are also using expert elicitation to link pressures with state components. And expert elicitation is used so that we can cover all measures, pressures, and state components and the topics that we are including in the analysis. So just to have as comprehensive analysis as possible. In the early stages, we identified that we couldn't do the analysis only based on existing scientific literature, but had to use expert elicitation to be able to conduct the analysis as extensively as we wanted to. And that's the reason for using expert elicitation. This slide lists the potential results from the sufficiency of measures analysis. It's quite a long list, and it's probably not even complete. But here you can see some examples of what kind of results we can get. Some of them are quite, we have some intermediate results and the final results. So the final results, the main objective is to assess whether existing measures are sufficient in achieving good environmental status or specific status improvement for the different topics. And where we need additional measures. But also other kinds of questions can be asked and answered based on the data. All of the results are topic specific. They may also be specific to pressures and activities. The analysis is done mainly at the Baltic Sea scale, but the results will be available also on a more detailed spatial scale, for example, at the sub-basin scale. So they will be also spatially detailed. But this analysis can really provide information on several issues relevant to the Baltic Sea environment and its improvement. And the timeline for the work for this year, which is relevant to the data validation. So we aim to complete all data collection in February 2020. So all data should be collected by the end of February. And these data, both the survey data and the literature data, will be validated by HELCOM working groups, either intersessionally or in their spring meetings. And we will present preliminary results of the analysis to the SOM platform meeting at the end of March. We have set up a website which includes some information sources on sufficiency of measures, some documents as well as presentations. So you can visit that, and our aim is to put the webinar there as well. That's all for this overview presentation. I would now move onwards with Lisa's presentation, and after that you will have the opportunity to ask questions.
Hello, my name is Nadia. I'm from Denmark, and I was wondering, because you talked about the questionnaires, and I know that one of my colleagues just got the one about fish. Do you have any left, or all of them sent to the right experts?
So, the experts to respond to the sufficiency of measures surveys. Right now we have this effectiveness of measures survey and pressure state linkages surveys. So the experts have been identified through the HELCOM structure. So there are experts who are participants of HELCOM expert groups and networks. They have participated in the sufficiency of measures workshops in the fall 2019, or they have been nominated by national contacts, national HELCOM contacts, to respond to these surveys. So that explains very shortly the identification of potential respondents to the SOM expert surveys. The list of experts who have been nominated and identified to respond to the surveys has been compiled and made available to the national contacts of the SOM platform for their review. Does that answer the question completely?
Thank you. Not really. I was wondering because we haven't seen the survey for marine litter. Do you know what the status is for that one?
Okay, so I can also explain the status of the expert surveys. So right now we have sent out surveys for birds, mammals, benthic habitats, fish, hazardous substances, and non-indigenous species. We are still going to send out surveys for marine litter, noise, and nutrient inputs from agriculture. So they will be sent out as soon as possible, definitely during January. Any additional questions? At this point, we can also continue after Lisa's presentation. You can ask questions related to the overview and the status of the work after Lisa's presentation. Okay, very good. Let's move forward.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry. Yes. So, hi, Katja Bull from BSH. I have one question regarding the choice opportunities in the questionnaires. So there's also some suggestions for new measures where the experts are asked whether they find they will be helpful or not, and they are. Yeah, I was just wondering from which group did develop those questions. Thank you.
So some expert surveys that I'm referring to assess the effectiveness of measures in reducing pressures, and these are based on existing measures. And then the other surveys assess the effect of changes in pressures on environmental status. So these are not related to new measures, but related to existing measures. So perhaps you are referring to some other surveys?
The synopsis.
No, I'm referring to the non-indigenous species survey, and there's also some questions on biofouling, for example, included there. And I was just wondering because sometimes they're not quite consistent with how the regulatory status of this biofouling issue is. So I was just wondering who developed those. Thank you.
So obviously we're assessing the effectiveness of measures on the scale of the Baltic Sea. So some measures may be used in some countries and not in some countries or some areas. And those measures may well be those that are perhaps planned to be implemented in the time frame of the business as usual. But these surveys do not in any way take a stance on who would develop those measures. But if indeed they are used, then or would be used in the future, the experts are assessed to assess their potential effectiveness in relation to other measures. Okay, thank you. Now I suggest that we move forward to the second presentation and continue the questions later.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm going to talk about the use of expert survey responses in the SOM analysis. And so basically we have three different surveys, one on the activity pressure contribution, one on the measure effectiveness, and then one on the pressure state linkages. And the survey responses can be used to formulate 3-point estimates. And minimum, maximum, and most likely values for contribution of activities to pressures and required pressure reductions reached GES or improvement in state can be retrieved directly from those surveys. And then the relative effectiveness of measure types, their certainties, and the percent effectiveness of the most effective measure can be used to form 3-point estimate for the effectiveness of measures. And then for each 3-point expert estimate, we can turn them into a probability distribution. So by 3-point estimate, I mean minimum value, most likely value, and the maximum value. And then the sets of point values drawn from these expert-specific distributions can be pooled over experts to make an aggregated distribution representing all the experts. So the aggregate distribution can be defined based on these pooled values. And then for the distributions, for the experts, we can use alternative distributional assumptions. So we can use triangular, uniform, beta, or different kind of beta distributions. And then there are sort of different assumptions on the type of probability distribution. So for example, for beta distributions, the values close to the most likely value are more likely, whereas for uniform distribution, all values from minimum to maximum are equally probable. So here's an example of 3-point estimates of 2 respondents. So we assume that there are 2 experts which give different responses on the minimum, most likely, and maximum values. And on the left side, you can see a distribution made by taking an average of the minimum, most likely, and maximum value, whereas on the right side, you can see the pooled distributions that is aggregated from the individual distributions of the experts. And then the aggregated distributions of pooled values account better for the uncertainties and extreme values given by all respondents. So you can see, for example, that they reach further on the right to 0.8, whereas the one where we use the averages on minimum, most likely, and maximum, the highest values 55%. And then here is an example of the aggregated distribution. So here's how activities 1 to 5 contribute to pressure X. And these distributions are pulled from 4 expert-specific beta distributions. And then these are not like any real responses to these surveys, but these are values that I created randomly that represent the possible values that the expert could answer with these surveys. And the expert-specific distributions are defined from responses on minimum, maximum, and most likely contribution of activities to pressures. So here are the activities contributing to one pressure. And then based on these distributions, we can map the activity pressure contributions, so we can see how do activities contribute to different pressures, which activities contribute to multiple pressures, and then how significant are the contributions and what are their uncertainties. And for example, in this picture on the left there are the activities, and then on the right there are the pressures, and the colors of the lines and their thicknesses can be used to represent the uncertainties and the expected contributions to the pressures. And then we move to the effectiveness of measures. So in the surveys we ask how the measures or the measure types reduce pressure from an activity. So the measure type pressure reductions are based on relative effectiveness of measure type, certainty of the effectiveness, and expected effectiveness of the most effective measure type. And the effectiveness responses are used to assess most likely effectiveness, and certainty responses are used to assess minimum and maximum effectiveness. And again, we make separate distributions for each expert answering these surveys and pool these distributions to aggregated distributions. So here is an example of the aggregated distributions. So what is the reduction of pressure X from an activity Y by all measure types that reduce pressure X from activity Y? So each of the distribution represents one measure type and how it can reduce the pressure from an activity. So it answers how much does a measure type reduce pressure X resulting from activity Y. But then in this picture you can see the reduction in total pressure X through activity Y by all measure types that reduce pressure X from an activity. So these are the same measure types that were in the previous example, but now we take into account the activity pressure contribution. So how much does a measure type reduce pressure X in total by reducing it from activity Y? And then again we can map these. So what are the expected total pressure reduction resulting from different measure types through all activities? And which measure types are effective in reducing different pressures? For example, these answers can be used when we want to assess the new measures. So what kind of measures do we need to reduce the pressures where we see the gaps? And now we move on to the effectiveness of actual measures. So now no longer we are talking about the measure types, but we are talking about the actual measures. So how they affect the total pressures. And for this we use a Monte Carlo simulation methods, where the actual measures are linked to respective measure types and simulated accordingly. And the data is randomly drawn from distributions that represent pooled activity pressure contributions and pooled pressure reductions from measure types. And from each of these distributions, a large number of values is drawn and the pressure reductions are calculated. And here you can see a sort of a result on the effectiveness of measures on one pressure. So the total reduction in pressure presented in percentages can be presented as a probability distribution. And from this distribution, an expected reduction in pressure can be estimated. And it is also possible to assess the likelihood that reduction in pressure is less or more than some percent, and that pressure reduction is between some percent values. And because the results are quite numerical and sort of distributional, we might want to have some more descriptive ways to present these results. So here I have made I've presented the pressure reduction in colors, and each of the colors sort of represents a combination of the expected pressure reduction and the certainty of the pressure reduction. And in the upper left corner are the pressure reductions for all different basins, and then we can present the same results for some more aggregated assessment units or for the whole Baltic Sea level. And there are also other more descriptive ways to represent these pressure reduction results. Then we move to the pressure state linkages. So how for example, the reductions in pressures improve the state. So in the surveys, we get the 3-point estimates based on the minimum, maximum, and most likely values on how much the total pressure has to be decreased in order to reach good state or to see a noticeable improvement in state. And for that, we also ask what are the significant pressures affecting each state components. So I think what Heini already described, so there are two different ways depending on whether the good environmental status threshold exists or if it doesn't exist. So if there isn't threshold, then we can ask how much significant pressures need to be reduced to reach good state. Whereas if there is no threshold, then we ask how much significant pressures need to be reduced to reach noticeable improvement in state. And based on the answer, we can define a good environmental status cumulative distribution, which tells what is the probability to reach good environmental state given the total pressure reduction in the significant pressures affecting this state component. And here you can see, first on the left, you can see the required reduction in total pressure to achieve good state or noticeable improvement in state. So it is based on the 3-point estimates. But then on the right side, we see the cumulative distribution, which tells for each reduction in total pressure, what is the probability to reach good state. I think this was already covered, but probability to achieve GES cannot be assessed for state component without a GES threshold. And for these, probability of achieving noticeable state improvements from reduction in significant pressure is assessed. And a probability distribution and cumulative distribution of reduction in total pressure required for state improvement is defined. And then what comes to the results, based on the simulated pressure reduction results, we can estimate what is the expected reduction in total pressure affecting the state by weighing the pressure reductions, the simulated pressure reductions by their significance to given state component. And for significance scores and cumulative distributions to reach GES or state improvement also allow the mapping of activities and measure types to state. So we can create similar images that we created, for example, for the activity pressure contributions and on the how measures affect pressures in total. So what activities affect different state components and what measure types can be effective in improving different state components. And the state components are assessed as populations or entities that can cover multiple basins. And based on the expected reduction in total pressure, one can estimate what is the expected probability to reach good state or achieve improvement in state? Or, for example, what is the probability range to reach good state when pressure reductions are between the 25 and 75 percentile of the simulated pressure reduction distributions? So here is the image describing this percentile range, and then from this it is possible to define what is the probability of GES or noticeable improvement in state as a range. And then, like, for the overall interpretation of the SOM results. So the results and data of the model can be transformed to more descriptive categorical values, for example, green, yellow, red, or low, medium, high, or something else like rankings. And the final results on the total reduction of pressure or achieving GES should be interpreted in the context of the model relative to the other results. So the results don't really tell any absolute improvements in the state. And additional results, for example, on the effectiveness of measured types in reducing pressures, and summaries of the activity pressure contributions can be used to interpret the final results and to identify what type of new measures are needed. And then what comes to reductions in pressures, they can be presented in actual units of measures and not just percentages if we know the pressure levels and the reduction target in the actual values. And then finally, as Heini already said, that the estimates from literature can be used to replace survey data or intermediate results of the SOM analysis, or they can be used as reference points to compare the results. Thank you.
Okay, that covers the presentations part. I think we could now move on to discussion and questions. So you are very welcome to ask both on the overview part and then more specific questions regarding the use of the survey responses in the SOM model. There are quite a few of you, but let's try to do it such that the one who is interested in asking just starts speaking. Okay, any questions whatsoever, just feel free to ask. We are here to respond.
This is Lone Söderberg from Denmark. If I may ask a question?
Please.
Could you please tell me how many responses have been received per topic so far? Thank you.
Okay, that's a tricky question because I do not have the exact number for each of the topics. I have the general overview. We have, let's say, from a couple of responses to 20 responses per topic. That's the range. It really varies by topic, and the responding time is still ongoing. We have identified some issues with the distribution of the SOM surveys, and that's why we are continuing the time until the end of January. So based on the situation, we are, I think we are quite happy with the number of responses, and we are definitely expecting more responses. And if you are in the position to encourage additional responses in your country, that would be very welcome. So you are definitely welcome to contact your national experts and encourage them to answer.
Thank you very much. That was very helpful for us to hear, and thank you very much for the presentations as well. That it helps improve my understanding of how this will be used. But I must say that I'm still a little bit concerned about, for example, the number of responses to these surveys and how the uncertainty then will be handled, or well, yeah, how well we will do for all the topics. It's still a little bit difficult, I think, to see it at this point in time.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I think we are definitely expecting differences across topics, and that should and will be reflected in reporting of the results. For example, if we have very few responses for some topics, obviously then the associated uncertainties is higher. So I think it definitely should be reflected in the reporting and can be reflected in the reporting.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, my name is Sirkka Tattari. I come from Finnish Environment Institute.
Hello.
And I'm representing the agricultural nutrient loading.
Yes.
And in some of your slides, you mentioned that you are grouping the measures. Could you explain a little bit how do you group them?
So first of all, the justification for grouping the measures is that we cannot work on the level of individual measures because there are simply too many of them. So they are, we have identified measures that have similarities in different respects and then group them together. So the measure types are, so the measures are, individual measures are grouped into these more general measure types, and the measure types have been formulated based on existing individual measures. And then we will also link all of the individual measures in national and regional policies to these measure types. For agriculture, the situation is a little bit different, so nutrient inputs from agriculture. I think there we operate more on the level of individual measures. The situation is a little bit different because we are relying on the palette of measures. And but for nutrient inputs from agriculture, we are, I think, we are more on the level of individual measures than very highly grouped measure types. For other topics, we are more doing this grouping and generalization more. I'm now checking the number of responses to the surveys, and to most surveys we have received more than 10 responses. Only a couple of them we are under 10. Some are over 20. So.
But isn't it also that multiple people have contributed to one response, so it's just not one person?
That's also possible because group responses are possible. Thanks for pointing that out. So in some cases, while we see it as a one response, could be that there are several experts who have actually contributed to the answer. So then sort of the number of experts who have responded is higher. But what I would just perhaps to let you know, I think we would like definitely more responses, especially, well, we would like more responses for all topics, but especially for mammals, let's say hazardous substances, and commercial fish. Those are the ones which have the lowest number of responses at the moment. Others are over 10. Okay, other questions? Was that answer sufficient, Sirkka?
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you.
At this point, it was sufficient.
Very good. Other questions, please ask.
Hello, my name is Daiva Seminini. I'm from the Center for Environmental Policy in Lithuania. First of all, thank you for nice, clear presentations. I would like to ask you, if possible, to give a bit more details how other sources, not only questionnaires, how other references. You mentioned there were some scientific references used, how they were used in all this process. Were they used only while writing, preparing questionnaires, or also they will be used in other steps of all this process?
I can give an overview, Lisa can complement. Then yes, we've definitely based on the entire sufficiency of measures approach to previous work in research projects, and in the beginning we identified that this linkage framework type of a model or approach had been used before and found useful. So that's for the general approach. And then if we go to these topic specifics and, for example, the effectiveness of measures data, which I mentioned that we will use literature data and if they exist, models to complement the expert data. So there are different options. So if the data in the literature models is such that it can be included in the SOM model, we can do that. So that means that it should be quite numerical and provide some estimates of the % reduction in pressures, or at least enable us to assess how the measures reduce the pressures in percentages. If that's not possible, then we could use the literature, the studies, to compare the results of the analysis too. So it could be used sort of like as a cross comparison point or a comparison point. Of course, the issue is that the literature doesn't necessarily answer exactly the same questions that we are examining or the experts have answered, but that's the overview. I think we are still in the process of thinking exactly how to do this, because the data collection has not been completed for the literature review either. So when that's finalized, I think we know better how that exactly should and can be done, and we should be able to present an approach or a proposal on how to incorporate the data in this next SOM platform meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Daiva. Yep.
Actually, I have, I don't know if your colleague would like to add, but I have another question, but related to these questionnaires. I noted that for mammals, as a subscientists and commercial fish, you would like to have more answers. So I will contact our experts, but do they all have these questionnaires? If not, where they can find them?
They definitely should have the questionnaire. So what we have sent by this date, we have sent invitations to respond to the surveys for the topics which I mentioned. So I'll repeat those in a moment. So we have sent invitations before Christmas and actually 2 reminders after Christmas to answer the surveys. And the answering time has been extended until the end of January. So the topics for which we have already sent the surveys are, let's see, birds, benthic habitats, fish, mammals, hazardous substances, and non-indigenous species. Is that all? No, I'm wondering. That should be all. We are still missing, we haven't sent out litter, noise, and nutrients from agriculture. So, for those topics, for the topics other than litter, noise, and nutrients from agriculture, we have sent out the survey. So the experts should have the survey links, but in some cases we have found that the experts have not received the invitations or the emails to the surveys. So it's also good if you can check that and confirm that they indeed have received the surveys, and if they have not, please contact me, Heini, or Luke Dodd from the HELCOM Secretariat, and we will arrange for the delivery of the survey links again, perhaps via the national contact points.
Okay, thank you. Clear. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I will take now a question from chat from Magdalena about the confidence rate. So in the expert surveys, the experts can assess their confidence level to the responses that they have given. So Magdalena asks what the confidence rate should be or how the confidence rate should be dealt with for experts who can indicate only a low confidence level. So, so this would enable calculating the overall confidence level in the responses, and that's, yes, I think that's why we've included such a question in the survey, so that we can also know for which topics or specific questions experts are more confident. Or experts are more confident in responding, and we can definitely use that. Do you want to maybe add, Lisa?
Yeah, I have some ideas. I don't know if we should we weight them by the confidence level, or just like generally somehow take into account like the questions that people feel that they are not like very confident answering to.
Yes. I think there are different approaches, and we, obviously you can see that we haven't settled for one, but it's possible, as Lisa said, to weight the responses or just report the information with the results, or somehow reflect the uncertainty in the model results. But the answers will be used when reporting the results or when running the sum model.
Yeah.
Okay, some additional questions? You can also send questions in the chat, seems to be working fine.
Hello, this is Nadia Brandberg from Denmark again. Hey, nice to see and hear your presentation too. I do have a question for one of the words regarding the notable improvement. Can you maybe elaborate what that means?
Okay, so that's actually formulated a little bit differently for different topics. So you refer to the situation where we do not have an agreed threshold for good environmental status, and we asked how the changes in pressures affect state. So for most of the topics, we've gone for assessing the change in the state component in percentages from a specific reduction in pressures in percentages. But for some individual state components, we have used the word noticeable improvement because it was very difficult or impossible to define these pressure reductions. So then there we have asked for what is the reduction pressures from a noticeable, required to achieve a noticeable change in state component. Otherwise, we are asking for the required pressure reduction to achieve a specific change in state components in percentages, and that's how it's done for most of the topics.
So was it the people who were answering the questionnaires, they didn't find it comfortable to answering this specific topic?
Yes, so when we were developing the surveys, the topic teams or the groups who were involved in developing found it difficult to define these changes in the state component, and that's in percentages. So that's why we've used the noticeable change. But that's I have to say that's an exception. So there aren't many like those.
Okay. So there are 3 different options for the state pressure state linkage.
Yeah, let's say that the 2 main. So there's a GS threshold and we're asking for the required pressure reduction. Or there is no GS threshold, we are asking for the required pressure reduction to achieve a specific change, improvement in the state component, or in very exceptional cases to achieve a noticeable change in state component, not in percentages. I hope that answers your question, Natio.
Thank you. I think more or less. So I might get back to this at a later stage. But thank you very much.
Please do. We can also, if you're interested, I can go check for which topics or specific state components we've used that formulation. Yes, but.
Yeah, that could be nice to see, and also, as you said, that it depends on which topics we are talking about, so it could be nice to get some more information for each topic.
Yes, and we are definitely planning to provide topic-specific information latest at the next Zoom platform meeting. So we will have a draft report for one of the topics showing what kind of results, topic-specific results and approaches or details we are using or having, and then we can answer questions for specific topics. But the reporting will be also at the level of topics at a later stage.
Okay, thank you very much. That sounds nice. My college, no, but thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we have a message from Magdalena saying that some HELCOM experts are experts in state and monitoring, but haven't assessed the sufficiency of measures before and do not have expertise in this subject. So as I mentioned, I don't think anyone has really assessed the sufficiency of measures, at least to this extent, before. So it's rather difficult to find experts who had done this exercise before and could use their previous expertise. And that's why we are relying on the HELCOM experts in the HELCOM expert groups and networks. We understand that this is a difficult exercise, and that I think that's given. It's quite difficult. It's quite complicated, but this is what HELCOM has decided to do. We have been tasked to do this, and we are doing this to the best of our ability, and of course the experts involved are doing it to their best ability. And all of this will be reflected in the reporting, and also the associated uncertainty will be reflected in reporting of the results. Okay, some additional questions? Seems like there are no additional questions. I'll give you just one opportunity more. Now is the time to ask if you want. Okay, that's all. So I would like to thank you all for participating, for listening to our presentations, and also for your active participation and discussion and questions. We have recorded this webinar, and as I said, we will make it available on the HELCOM website. We will inform the SOM platform and other HELCOM contacts as well, so you can access that. Okay, very good. Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.